Engineer 775 here. Had to do a little cutting on a piece of steel for a job, making a bracket, and thought I might share this with you. I'm finally switching over. If you're like most DIYers, like myself, you have had a good oxyacetylene setup. And I say oxyacetylene because this is an acetylene tank, this is an oxygen tank, but it's kind of a thing of the past for most fabricators, unless you're doing a lot of brazing, and not many people are doing that, from what I gather. And so we switched over, as many of you have probably already done, or maybe you're thinking about it, or maybe you didn't even know you could do it, is take your regular barbecue gas grill 20-pound cylinder and use that instead of acetylene. It is a lot cheaper to refill your propane tank than it is to find a welding supply place and go fill up that acetylene tank. So I don't know about you, but it's about $13 to $15 depending on the place where I can refill my propane cylinder. And that cylinder will last through about 4 tanks of oxygen. So for most people, that would be years of cutting and heating and bending. Some people, they are fabricators and burn through that, and this is too small of a rig for them. But for most people on a homestead or a farm, and you have a shop where you have a welder and you need to cut steel and cut various pieces of metal, this is a great setup. So I wanted to show you, if you want to look at these tips, the difference between, you have to make, not only change out your tanks, but you've got to change out the style of tips, and they make tips for propane. This is your standard small cutting tip, and it's just a one-piece unit. On a propane setup, you have 2 pieces. You have this inner piece that has these serrations that kind of break up the propane, because propane will typically go out if you try to use a regular cutting tip. It just doesn't work right. So you've got to get a propane tip for cutting. There are propane tips for heating, and there are propane tips for brazing, believe it or not. And so you just put your tips on and keep your other tips in case you want to switch back. And then things like Rosebuds to heat with, these are designed for propane, not for acetylene. So, okay, let's go ahead and just show you. It looks a little different. I'm going to bring this in, just got a few pieces I'm going to cut. So, but if you do weld and fix your own things, you got to have a little cutting torch setup or heating setup. Maybe you want to bend a bunch of rebar, or just bend a 90-degree angle on a plate of steel. That's where the Rosebud is a beautiful thing, because you can really spread out the weld. Spread out the heat. The other cool thing about a Rosebud, if you have a weld that is in a high stress concentration area, you can relieve the stress. It's kind of a on the farm thing, on the homestead thing. You don't really know what you're doing metallurgically to the materials, but what you're doing is relieving that weld, all the stress that was put into the material by welding it and pulling that steel together. The Rosebud's great to go over that and relieve that whole area, kind of a stress relief. It's not very scientific. We could go there and talk about all the phases of metals and eutectics and pereutectics, but we're not going to go there, because for the DIYer, who cares, right? We want to get the job done, and just know that a Rosebud is a very helpful tool for not only heating and bending, but for stress relieving the welds after you've completed them. So I'm just gonna show you the flame, a little bit of difference. Well, if you're probably already familiar with acetylene, so you're gonna get propane. So I turn a propane on and I just crack it, and I keep my regulators low, about 6 pounds on my regulator, and kind of like the way I've operated with acetylene. Now I could be running it wrong, but I always was taught that make sure you're able to turn that, if there's a problem in anything, be able to turn that acetylene off fast. The oxygen, I just open up, and there we go. Okay, we're gonna light up our propane. You see the flame's a little different looking on when you do propane. We'll feather in the oxygen, smell that propane. I haven't quite figured out the adjustment yet on the regulators, but I'm working on it. So, any of you welding experts out there, Okay, so just what, cameraman scared or something? You get that?
Got a little burnt.
You got burnt? How's the cameraman get burnt? When the cameraman gets too close. Okay, safety last. No, just kidding. Safety first. All right, so that's just showing you the cutting torch. A little different. Still getting used to the regulator pressures, and I think the tips are a little more finicky when it comes to keeping them clean. I don't know if you can see the tip. When you look at it, it's concave. It's got a little indentation. Again, that keeps that propane from going out. And so I'm just getting the hang of it, but I will get the hang of it. And let's show you the Rosebud. I'm going to take off the cutting torch, and I'll put on a Rosebud, and just to show you some heating with a propane, special propane tip. Obviously, you can get a Rosebud for acetylene, oxyacetylene. So the Rosebud, and this is a small torch, small Hobart kit, which is usually fine for the average farmer, homeowner, wannabe fabricator. So if we wanted to heat something up, just a piece of something I've had for a long time kicking around the shop, I don't know why. Gotta have scrap around too when you get into this. Okay, so you start it the same way, a little bit of propane and feathering oxygen, putting on a lot more volume. Rosebud is great, not concentrated, really heat an item. So just a quick example of just heating something up. Rosebud's nice. It doesn't ruin the surface of the piece you're working on, and you can really spread that on. You want to spread it out, just like bending anything else, conduit, whatever. You want to spread the heat out. And again, if there was I've used them a lot for relieving welds. If you're doing a lot of heavy welding in a critical area. I just did some welding on a tractor bucket I broke, and I just want to stress relieve the welds, just kind of fan that Rosebud over it. But this is a propane setup, and it worked pretty good. I was able to do still nice and hot, and bend my piece where I wanted it, and we're good to go. So that's just a quick demonstration of switching over from acetylene to propane, and for your torches and your heating, and a lot cheaper than acetylene. And like maybe for you, same for me, I gotta go a long ways to find a welding supply place, and I only have to go a couple miles to find a place where I can refill my propane. Or some of you are set up to refill your propane yourself. So anyway, I think that's it. It's Engineer 775 with a welding tip. I'll do some welding demos. I don't know if people would like to see them or not. I've got an old faithful. You want to look at this Lincoln Ideal Arc 300. It's an old beast that has it's so smooth, much smoother than the new machines, in my opinion. I do have a TIG setup with argon. Got a little problem with my foot pedal controls right now. The problem with old stuff. But in terms of stick welding, this thing is like butter. And AC, DC, whatever you want to do. And then we can get into some fancy TIG welding if I get my switch fixed, and I can show you how you weld aluminum with different tungstens, 2% thoriated tungsten, and we can weld some boat props or motorcycle cases. I used to do that for folks, and it was kind of fun when they ran their boats aground and ruined their props. I'd rebuild them up and build them up with aluminum. Motorcycle cases too. Got to keep dirt bikes running. And then just fixing anything. The stick welder is so smooth. There's so many adjustments. You can dial it in and do a really nice job stick welding. So I'm not a professional welder. I've just done a lot of welding. It's what got me through college, was welding and grinding. So anyway, hopefully I can show you some of my tricks I've learned. This is Engineer 775 signing out.